Alright, the Modern Mystic has made another video saying fractional reserve banking is the cause, fiat currency. These are the causes of the economic problem. And it's just a pile of crap. I mean, it's just garbage. I just don't know. I can't believe he's, drunk that stupid Kool-Aid. There's just no other way to do banking except fractional reserve banking. And so, I don't even know how to go about explaining this, but let's just make a bank. And this, the idea these guys are talking like, okay, well, every deposit has to be 100%. So like, say if I put gold in, I put gold into the bank. Their argument, like let's say 50 of gold. Their argument is that there always has to be $50 of gold in the bank. Okay, and so how can you loan the money if you don't reduce how much gold is in the bank? So it's almost like their argument is that whoever owns the bank, the bankers, they would somehow have to have a huge, like how much ever amount of gold, like 1,000 golds or something, they would have to start off with that much income in the bank, like as a big solid blob, and then they could lend this deposit out. Okay, because they had 1,000 gold to back it up, so they could lend whatever that number would, that would be 20 of these 50 golds, and then they could pay me interest. But why would they pay me interest? Why wouldn't they just lend their own gold and just say, fuck this depositor guy, because he's not accomplishing anything? I mean, if I have to insure every one of these deposits with another hunk of gold, what good is it? Because you got gold, like I said, you got gold going out to loans. And their argument sort of is, well, you can't loan this gold because you always have to have this full reserve banking. So that would be full reserve. It's like every 50 that went out, you would have to have 50 in the bank to cover it. Well, obviously, how could the depositor be covering it unless you only lent out half of what they deposited? But still, even then, yeah, well, that would work. You could lend out half of what the depositor puts in. So if the depositor put in 100 gold, you could lend out 50 because you'd still have 50 to cover that 50 that you lent out. But it wouldn't make any difference because you still wouldn't have the 100 to cover the deposit. See, I mean, they're saying that deposits have to be fully reserved. And so you can't lend out anything. You can only lend out the money that the bankers own, as much as they can cover. And so why would you wouldn't even bother with this. So all banking is fractional reserve banking. The question is how low can the reserves go? How little can you have in the bank in actual hard gold assets? Because the current banking crisis is basically created because the banks have as assets, let's just have a column here, like this is what they've, well, let's not do that column thing. Well, let's do it, but it doesn't matter. So let's just say, somebody puts a house in here. They get the house. The deed to the house goes into their bank. It doesn't go into the person doesn't get to keep it. The bank owns it. So it has value when it loans out the $100,000. So for a $100,000 loan for a house, the bank has $150,000 in deed. That's just the way it works out. I mean, they get to hold the extra value, and if they don't get the loan paid back, they get to keep that extra value. But what has happened is all those mortgage assets started declining in value, and so then these assets drop. But the basic idea was just that, yeah, they have these assets, why not loan them? So they just keep loaning money. And then when their reserves get low enough where they can't keep loaning out what they have as assets, the federal government can come in, and what the federal government will do is basically say, you can print more cash to lend out more money because we'll put in a deposit of, say, $1 million or whatever it would be. And that deposit will be in the form of a U.S. savings bond. So what basically will happen is the printed money will buy a U.S. savings bond. And so the bank will basically purchase for the U.S. for the Federal Reserve a U.S. savings bond, put it in the account as a deposit. So now the bank can loan out this money because it has a deposit just in case there's a run on the bank. And all this is about runs on the bank. And so what happened in the bank bailout was basically like, yeah, okay, the bankers had a bunch of these crappy deposits. Crappy assets. So they had assets values that were declining. and they had basically loaned out more money based on the higher value of those assets, and so their reserve numbers were getting lower and lower because of this reduction in this asset value. And what the government basically did was just buy up these bad assets at the real price, so that returned the reserve numbers up to a higher price, because the government just bought the crappy assets at their original value price. So they just bailed out the bank. But all this is to stop a run on the bank, basically. So the idea is that if everybody wanted to pull their assets out at once, the banks wouldn't have the assets to cover it. But the truth is they do. They just don't have it in cash. And that's the distinction here. And Nick keeps forgetting that distinction. So I'm going to go back to this argument that what you have to understand, what's happening in the world now with this fiat currency that they complain about, which is only, the U.S. government has only printed something between $3 and $4 trillion. Okay, that's all the paper currency. That's all there is. It's not much. I mean, you're talking, hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of value, maybe 150, 200, I don't know, in the entire economy. So you're talking about 1 or 2% of the entire economy is made up of money. The rest of the economy is made up of deeds, and they're in the form of stock certificates, mortgages, well, not mortgages, but the deed to the house, even your whatever they call it, it's not pink slip, with the thing that you own your car by, that's a deed. I mean, they're just all over the place. There's all these little pieces of contract paper that are as good as money. They just aren't something you can pay your taxes with, and they just aren't something you're usually going to get paid by an employer in. But we do have benefits that are non-cash now, so employees do work for non-cash benefits. But the bottom line is you got to pay your taxes in U.S. dollars, so you got to convert your other deeds, your other possessions, into some sort of cash somewhere to be able to pay your taxes. So that's what keeps money valuable. Is just the fact that it's the only thing the government will accept as payment. So you got to have it when you got to have it. I mean, when you need it, you're going to need it. And employees, generally speaking, are only going to want that too. So it's still going to have value. But anyway, so it just has nothing to do with this fiat currency stuff, because everything in the economy, all that's happened over time, is that we've become very good. I mean, everything's electronic now, and all the rest of this stuff. So almost every piece of property that you can own now has been turned into a very reliable piece of contract paper, a very reliable deed, and so now you don't have to. It works just like money, and it can be transferred. You can just almost automatically. It's all denominated in U.S. dollars in terms of its value. So everything equals some sort of dollar value of money. And and so there's just all this stuff in the world. There's just all this stuff, houses and ownership of companies and all that kind of stuff. And what's basically happened, though, is that very few people own most of this stuff. Most of the deeds are in their hands, and the rest of the world is basically renting it. And the real proof of the fact that you're renting your life from them, from these owners, is the U.S. government's debt. Because you say that, let's say it's just $13 trillion. What that number represents is how much rent basically you owe for your life. We've rented our life. We don't own any part of our life because we owe this $13 trillion, and that has to be paid back to these people who have lent the government the money in the form of dollars or deeds that they've transferred for that bond, for a U.S. bond. And so they've given the government real value in the form of stock certificates or U.S. dollars or whatever they can transfer into a bank, and they've received a U.S. bond that's just an IOU from the U.S. government saying, yeah, we'll pay you back the money. And so that's a huge, it's a huge amount of money. And so that's, hundreds of thousands of dollars per employed human in America. And so he thinks he owns it. Somebody might think they own their house, but they're really renting their house. Even though they think they're owners, they're not really owners. because they owe this money back. And so all the rich have done is be able to find some way to now make money on their stuff. And what they've done is basically, when you lend stuff, and that's what they've done, they basically lent us their stuff. They've put their stuff in the bank. They've gotten a U.S. bond back, a piece of paper saying they're owed their stuff back. The U.S. government has spent their stuff in the economy, paid people, given them jobs, done all that stuff. But it's all rented. So that money has to be paid back to these people, and until it is paid back, it has to be the bond has to be fed with the interest, you know. So there's always this extra. So it's not even that they have to pay back the original stuff the government borrowed. It has to pay back the original stuff plus extra stuff, and the only way it can extract that extra stuff is you know, it has to get stuff. There has to be new stuff made, and obviously we don't make new stuff. We just exploit.